Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Ahlan wa sahlan wa marhaba. A warm welcome to Muslima Insight. Today in Muslima Insight, we are taking a closer look at effective parenting techniques. And with me in studio to share with us their wisdom and their knowledge on this very vast topic, I've got a brother called Gerald Williamson, who is a clinical psychologist, educationist, researcher, and development specialist, as well as director of a company called Shaping the Learner. A warm welcome and assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum salam. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. And of course also Sister Dolly Ayub, who is a student faculty advisor from UP. Again, a warm welcome and assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum salam. Thanks for having me, Adila.
Thank you for being here. In coming to this topic of children, it's obviously a topic that is close to the hearts of all people, of all parents especially. And from a layperson's perspective, if I can perhaps start off, is there such a thing as a normal child? What can we look at, or what can a person define? What is normal psychological development, emotional development? What is the ideal that parents perhaps seek but never find?
Adila, that's a beautiful question. I'd like to answer you with the prefacing of the whole idea that, you know, people like us today give wisdom or provide what we know. But rearing children in diverse contexts and diverse cultures is a complex thing. So some of the things that we may say today, for example, might not feel at home with some parents. And I think we ask Marv about that, because it's not really a case that we're prescribing to people out there on how exactly they should be rearing their children. Save for the guideline that it should work for them and it work for the child and for their community around them. Right. So with that in mind, the big question, what is a normal child? Right. So I don't know if you ever heard people say to you precisely is, or ask you, you know, I'm noticing my child doing this or that, and therefore, is this normal? Right? Because parents have a natural instinct to be concerned about their child's well-being. At least most parents do. So, you know, in exploring this question, I must tell you first, I've come to the conclusion there is no such thing as a normal child. I rather would fall back on the idea that there is different cultures, there is different context, there's different parenting techniques and different types of homes. And we got to examine within our own homes what works and what doesn't. Although there's a couple of universal principles, though, that we're going to reflect on today, on what is beneficial for most children and what is not.
Wonderful. And sister, from your side?
Yeah, no, I agree with Gerald. I think you have to take the context into account. I think also what one needs to look at as well is we look at two things. Not two things, in fact, a lot of things. You have to look at the whole child. So one can't just speak about emotional development and psychological development without taking into account what's going on in their minds. So their thinking processes, we call it cognitive processes, and how their brain's growing and developing.
So the biological aspect, the food children eat, all that comes into play, of course, as well then.
Yes, and also the child development. So, for example, you'll start with a baby and then go on to a toddler. Obviously, the thinking processes are different because you, as the child develops, the brain's growing and children are able to then express themselves. So when you look at a baby, the first emotion you'll see is crying and then smiling. And then when you go on to a toddler, obviously the child's now acquiring language and is able to express their emotions. And as you go on to the preschooler's language acquisition is quite developed, very developed, and also then able to express how I'm feeling. So, and as they grow older, you then go on to the child in school, your 6 to 12-year-old. We call it middle childhood. And then there's a whole range of emotions that come out. And children are actually at that age able to experience not just one emotion, but a whole range of emotions, and even two emotions at one time. And then obviously going on to the adolescence was going through physical changes, cognitive changes, and also then the emotional changes as well.
And just to come on that, where you speak about the changes that adolescents go through, I think it's something that a lot of people overlook. Teenagers that might want to sleep longer.
Yes.
What is your take on that? What can you tell people, the viewers, about that development, that phase of development that it causes in many homes conflict because they don't understand the biological change that the teenager is going through?
Yes.
Of course. In my opinion, when I'd like to start with another statement and we just work towards this one. When a parent asks you, so how can I be a good parent and what will make me an effective parent? Right? I would always answer and say, look, in my mind, a good parent is a parent who always opens them up to learn more, right? To find out more about how best they can help guide their child, help grow their child in this very complex world. A world that keeps on changing every second and every minute of the day. In a world where the average child in a week takes in more information than what a parent 40 years ago did in a whole year.
Absolutely.
Right? So it's a lot of processing that today's kids have to do to try and make sense of this world. So if you say, all right, I have a child and I'm in this phase of development now, I always ask the parent, do you know what to expect in this phase of development? I mean, there's a lot of information out there. So if you're a parent that have access to formal books, for example, if you're a parent that don't have access to formal books, do you talk to others about what they've seen in this phase? A kind of way of learning in another way. So your idea that you acquire an understanding of this phase that your child is perhaps the best method to approach this thing called effective parenting or looking at better parenting techniques. So for me, that's the first. I don't know how you feel about
Yeah,
that.
no, I agree with you. I think it's important to identify, and like going now to the adolescent child who's going through hormonal changes, developing physically, I mean, in a very, very quick, at a very quick pace. And you talk about the sleep as well. And just to, I remember my mum saying that in their day, they were not allowed to sleep late in the morning. So they'd all be up at 6 o'clock. And that was the way things worked then. But I think, having my children, and then she comes and she says to me, but your children are sleeping, it's 11 o'clock and they still... And then I think it's actually understanding. We read up a lot. I think today's parents do. We read up a lot. We know that teenagers do sleep longer. They require more sleep. They require more sleep. So, as parents, we have to be, I think the main thing is to be connected to your child.
Yes.
And I think what we've actually, I think a lot of parents actually don't have is being connected. So when your child walks in the house, you need to know something's not right here. I have a sense, and then to follow your instinct, because parents have that instinct. But I think...
And for me it is also, like you have rightfully said, it's to know, to have some idea of what phase your child is in now. Gerald, from your side, the biological changes in the brain for teenagers, can you share with us what happens to the teenager that, for example, they sleep later? Because I think there are still parents that do not know about that chemical balances that changes.
Yes. It's a brilliant question. If I can throw out a couple of these type of thoughts, not just teenagers, I'll start with the teenager, but just to show you how fascinating your child can be. For teenagers, we know now, and scientists have started to discover this, that somewhere close to midnight, there's a certain hormone that starts secreting more than what we see in adults or in younger kids. And they found that this hormone is there in excessive amounts close to midnight. So anthropologists, of course, are thinking that that hormone might be present there as a protective factor for the group. Because if you're out in nature, and midnight is a time where predators hunt, so this is what scientists assume. The younger, who is the strongest, will be more awake. The older will be more asleep, right? So what we do now know is why some teenagers seem to become awake at midnight. And we never understood that, why they say now they're wide awake and they want to do things, and the rest of us just want to shut down and sleep, right? So this is one of the more fascinating things, and why families often would be at conflict with their teenagers to go to bed at a certain time. And they say, but I feel as awake as I am in the morning. And this is just one example of how science has allowed us to understand what happens to teenagers' bodies at midnight. For children, for example, for babies, if you understood that crawling, for example, is an integral part of later emotional development, you would, for example, pick up your child less, you would swaddle your child less, at least for short times. It's good for emotional bonding, but for longer times, it actually takes movement away. And when you reduce movement, you reduce brain growth. So when parents put children, for example, in walking rings, we now see later in life a range of physical and behavioral conditions that have come about due to restricting a child's movement. Right? So, for example, we know that during the crawling phase, a child is supposed to discover height and depth perception. So that should be an interesting idea for you, how late in life goes wrong if you don't allow them to crawl enough.
Yes, thank you, Gerald, for that input. It is time for us to go to a short break. Stay tuned. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. A warm welcome back to Muslima Insight. Brother Gerald, before the break, you were explaining to us about when there is restriction in the movement of small children, that in fact it has an effect later in life. Can you just tell us more about that?
Yes, Adila, look, the idea that you can restrict a baby from crawling, and often a mistake that we make is when they try to climb up on a couch or object, we pull them up and we put them onto it. So what we do know from an occupational perspective now, for example, that the idea of handwriting and core muscle development, that is the muscle that lie behind your stomach muscle, which is responsible for you sitting upright and maintaining balance in a chair, a skill they will later have to utilize in a school environment, becomes affected by children who move less, who crawl less. The idea that the baby's handwriting or copying from the board later is affected by the idea that if you crawl, a baby has to learn to judge height and depth during that movement. So by practicing the crawling movement over and over again, they now learn to do and apply that same task in a classroom when they have to copy from a board. So yes, if you restrict it, you then interfere with the later stage of development.
Sure. And Dolly,
I'd like to just add to that as well. I actually taught foundation phase for a long time, grade 2. And, we picked up on things like that very often, because you'll get children who actually, they'll sit on the desks but they're slouching. And so children that actually haven't had that free movement have things like shoulder instability, and they have difficulties with their handwriting, even concentration, because they sit like this on the desk. So I think that's an extremely valid point.
And there's little things that parents, perhaps, we don't know, that you're actually causing a problem for later in life.
And the point we're making about tying it with parenting is the idea that if you do not understand and if you do not equip yourself or try to find assistance or read up a lot on this type of stuff, you actually would accuse your 7-year-old or 6-year-old of being lazy, don't like to sit and write. Why are you always rolling on the carpet? Why don't you want to sit upright in the chair? Why is the teacher constantly saying that you're slouching? And why is your work so untidy? Because you're lying at an angle and you're writing and you're unable to sit upright. And so we see that if there's not enough knowledge about this phase, there's a lot of conflict in that home. And so effective parenting doesn't mean applying, therefore, discipline in a harsher way, because some parents become desperate after a while. And they say, look, according to the parenting handbook, I should be setting the boundaries and not taking no for an answer. So again, when I said earlier on, it becomes complex. It's hard just to say follow the following 5 rules, of parenting without taking the context into mind.
Absolutely, absolutely. And the same goes back again to the teenagers. That the conflict that comes about with the child sleeping late and parents not really understanding it's because of that biological change. That's why the child's behavior is like that.
Mood swings as well.
Yes.
Because of the hormonal changes.
Yes.
Teenagers are moody because of what's going on in their bodies.
Of course, Adila, we're not advocating overly liberal parenting, and lest we being accused of pandering to westernized methods of parent rearing. We're saying that every teenager is different. Not all of them get hormonally affected in exactly the same way. For the same reason that not every woman who, for example, goes through that sensitive time of the month acts in a irrational behavior way.
Of course.
And so forth. So our bodies deal differently with hormones. But there's generally a pattern, more times than most. Right? And teenagers are willing to work, for example, within the context of boundaries. Yes, they will get up and they'll be tired, etc., because you said, get up. Right? But it doesn't mean that their bodies will necessarily accommodate their time and feeling. But with a little bit more sensitivity from parents' side saying, I do understand that this is the way it is. However, because tasks have to be done, and there's only so many minutes in a day, I can't allow you to sleep on. So thank you for trying hard. Let's push through this feeling, right?
Yeah, and that understanding, and the teenager, I'm sure, will appreciate that, to know that I'm not being judged, I'm not being criticized, but there's understanding for what my body is going, because teenagers themselves don't know.
Exactly.
Yes. And then coming to the other question of, if we look, Dolly, you were mentioning the different phases, the baby, the toddler, the preschooler. What can parents sort of expect from an academic side? What milestones should children ideally be able to reach if there was the conducive, a more harmonious home that they grow up in?
Yeah, I think let's start maybe at the bottom with the preschoolers. Obviously, before a child goes to school, they have to know certain things. And, little things. It's not, my child has to know how to read. And I think that's the mistake we sometimes make. It's all these academic things. My child has to know how to count from 1 to 10. Yes, that's important. But it's the important things like concentration. Children at preschool level are learning through play. So we want their fingers to be strong enough to be able to write, so we give them a ball of clay to play with. So those things, doing little things to enhance those, those aspects are important. Not just academic in the sense my child has to know, how to read a book.
Or say the alphabet.
Yeah.
Maybe to add on to what Dolly has said, because she just triggered off an idea. When one says, this is what we tend to expect. Some kids take longer than others to master certain aspects of the skills. And so if you ask which part is an effective parenting technique, we will say patience and kindness and understanding are those virtues one applies as part of the toolkit, right?
Absolutely.
And not impatience, aggression, right, and blame. That's the other side of the toolkit you don't want in there. But another aspect of this is that if one tries to fit your child into a box because the school expects it, the nursery or preschool or even later the school will call you in and say your child is unable to do that. It's not to be able to say to those people that they're unrealistic either, but it's to say, look, we will try our best to meet some of those skills set. However, we will try our best to get our child there in time. We will find the help, we will put in some extra elbow grease, etc., but we will see how to get there. But this idea that you want to turn around and criticize your child and make your child feel blamed and bad, more than that, I say to the parents especially, don't feel that the fact that your child is struggling with this skill is an indictment on you. This is not measuring you.
That's a big thing.
Right. Earlier on, off camera, we were speaking about, I think Dolly mentioned the idea of how much parents have to learn for themselves about themselves and how they relate to their kids. I think the important bit is to realize that child rearing is not a competition. It's not a competition with yourself, for yourself. number one. It's not a competition against others to see if my child can do this more than others, which is often a favorite pastime of many parents.
Yes.
You know, and I think the last part that I find valuable for myself is to be able to say to parents, look, there are things that are common sense in parenting. And sometimes it goes in line with intuition. You feel that this is not right. I'll give you an example. Watching TV for hours, right? I mean, many people, and including myself at times, have been guilty where we plonk our child in front of the TV and we say, please be the child minder. I am busy. We are busy. This world of ours is taking up our time. We're busy with this, we're busy with that. So please mind the child. One-off occasions, or a little bit at a time, no problem. It's when there's a pattern. Now, again, I say a television is the ultimate child arrestor. It's a handcuff to your child's future. Because if you're going to put your child on the floor and not let them move for more than an hour, you're robbing your child of movement. And in 1 hour, if your child had to run around, play outside, crawl around, whatever, they would have developed so many different parts of their bodies and their brains, so many parts of learning, so many parts of character. And by tying our kids down in front of a TV, we actually, in many which ways, doing a disservice to our children.
Coming on this topic, what is your views on the TV games that children play? All the games that come out, what effect does that have on the psychology of the child and the development of the child?
Dolly, you want to answer that? I can add to it.
Yeah, no, I think like Gerald said, I think there's certain things you can learn. You know, fine motor development, just to start with the positive, and concentration. And but obviously there's a lot of negative factors, and I think timing is the amount of time you spend on that.
I fully agree with you. Unfortunately, it's time for us to once again go to a break. Don't go away. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. A warm welcome back to Muslima Insight. Gerald, before the break, Dolly was expounding for us on some of the positives perhaps of TV games, of the fine motor skills that can develop. What is your views on TV games, computer games? What effect does it have on a child?
You know, this is often a big question that parents ask, and more neurophysiological scientists are discovering that computer games have a role to play in certain types of skill development. You know, fine motor, hand-eye, speed, etc. But there's a big but here. They have found out that up to before a certain age, that the type of games that you play on a TV affects a child negatively from the following perspective: that it adrenalizes them too much. It pushes too much adrenaline into a child in a society that already adrenalizes kids from various other sources. You know, the competitive behaviors, the struggle for daily performance, parents getting up early, having to economically look after themselves, etc. So this child grows into a world that's already adrenalized. So when they watch TV games, etc., and they take part in it, or any violent television games, etc., the adrenaline levels of children do go up, especially before the age of 9. And the reason being is the way the brain interprets information, the way it processes, and the way it separates it from reality at the time. At another level, because TV games and violent games especially are so fast, there's not enough processing time for the brain to contextualize and to come to terms with it. It's like kind of reading a book at mega speed and then coming on the other side and asking, so tell me a little bit about that book. And many times the children can't put into context, which is an important part of human processing. If we contextualize an action, we are able to deal with it, if we're able to let it stress us less, etc. But we find that children are constantly in a stress mode when they do these activities, and because they can't go a couple of pages back to make sense of it and then go forward again like you do when you read, we find that they have excessively high blood pressures. They seem to act as if in the survival mode. That's why when they sit down, their eyes are constantly scanning the environment. Teachers are complaining that their heads are always turning. They're unable to focus, to sit still. And therefore, misguidedly so, many health practitioners will actually write a medical script for that condition. And they call it ADD or ADHD, attention deficit disorder, with hyperactivity or without. And they often don't analyze the home context to find out how much exposure does this child have to adult content, especially the content that they don't understand and it adrenalizes them, like watching the news at an early age, right? The child sees people dying, looks at the parent's face and hears the parent cursing and being unhappy about what they see, and the child puts two and two together that whatever is coming from that television is bad. And once a child interprets that in that way, again, they go into survival mode, fight or flight response. And so we see a range of problems. And one of the biggest ones, if I may add, is that when your adrenaline levels go slightly up, you have the blood from the frontal lobe of your brain actually diminishes in amount and it goes to the back part, the survival center. Many people know it as the medulla oblongata. And then what happens is that since there's very little blood in the front part of the brain where emotions are processed, where insight is developed, where the child needs to apply logic, etc., meaning these children often don't think through their actions. These teenagers seem to be irrational. They seem to be illogical. They don't follow the rules. They don't make sense. They argue, they fight, they backchat. The children seem to be aggressive or they spaced out. They're totally not there. They react slowly. The teachers complain about kids who are not in contact with reality. They don't respond to questions quick enough, etc. And we say, well, that's the adrenalized response to learning.
And these are things that parents, I think majority of people that I know are we're not aware of what effect, how deep effect these games and, like you say, the negative of what we see on TV affects the child. And coming to another aspect is conflict within a home. Going away a little bit from the topic of TV games and computer games is, what is the effect on a child when there is conflict in the home? Dad beats mum up or there's screaming and shouting. What does it actually do to the beingness of the child?
Well, I think that's what I call live television. Live video games, live violent video games. So it's exactly the same response. The fact of the matter, our bodies are wired for fight or flight. We as human beings respond to messages around us either by getting ready to engage it or we withdraw from it. So when our bodies get ready to do that, it's in response to a hormone called adrenaline. And of course, there are other hormones that secrete with adrenaline, one of them being cortisol. So when children witness conflict in the home, a lot of adrenaline and cortisol get secreted. Cortisol plays many functions in the body, but one of the less known functions is that it helps to reduce memory. So huge amounts of adrenaline leads to huge amounts of cortisol. And cortisol plays a big role and that's why you feel when you're so stressed out, my mind seems to be going blank, I can't remember details, and I seem to have blank spots. I sometimes potentially say to my wife, what's your name again? And that's when you're highly stressed because you can't remember even your loved ones around you. You again? You know, and that shows you the power of cortisol. And for children who have to go and put in a day's worth of learning with that amount of hormone in their body, and cortisol in small amounts is okay for us. It helps us survive. In huge amounts, it actually interferes with memory and learning.
Dolly, from your side, what would you say the effects will be on the academics of a child in such a situation?
I agree with Gerald. I think if you look at the home context, I think there is going to be conflict in the home. That's a given. But it's how we deal with it. And then again, going on to the fact that we as parents, we want our children to model our behavior. So what are we teaching our children? So if husband and wife have a disagreement, I don't like what you said, so I'm going to give you one smack. I'm teaching my child. That's how you deal with problems. And also when we do effective parenting, we teach parents how to listen to each other and to how to problem solve. So yes, there will be conflict in the home, but it's how we deal with that conflict. So if we deal with it in a manner that shows understanding, communication, that I'm not going to always agree with you. And in a family setup, even with siblings, children are not going to agree with each other. But I think what's important, what I'd like to say is that we need to teach healthy family functioning. And it can work. There's parents, there's families, there's couples that have learned to change the way they communicate. I mean, Gerald will tell you that. By changing the way we communicate, by listening to each other, by empathizing, but not always agreeing. What are we doing? We're showing the child.
And validating each other.
Yes.
It's okay to be you, even though we don't agree. It's fine to be you and have your views. Because that's another teaching that you then teach the child, is to respect the next person. And the other effect of this, what I would like to understand is, we get the different archetypes or the different boxes that we then place children in. For example, you get a child that we will say that it's a spoiled child. The child that always gets what he wants, that type of thing. What type of personality grows out of a child like that?
Yeah, that's a beautiful question. I like to say first, when a person says, well, this child is very spoiled, and sometimes a parent says it, then you often ask the parent, so are you saying to me you're struggling with setting boundaries and to say no to the child's request? I don't think there's such a thing as a spoiled child versus a child who's pushing their boundaries, which is a normal action. Children will ask more, they will want more. And I think that it's the adult that needs assistance with that. It's the adult that needs to ask the question, why is it so hard for me to say no to that request?
Exactly, right? It goes back to the parent.
Yes.
Right. So the idea that you often put children in boxes and saying that their behavior is in response to a certain condition like divorce, etc. So this must be this type of child, is not 100% clear cut. I think human beings, they grow at diverse rates in different contexts. Sometimes the person coming out of a divorced home will show qualities and characteristics that are very admirable. At another level, they may show vulnerabilities that is not so admirable, and that those vulnerabilities might not be seen by most of us. Such, for example, that person, let's say one of the effects that could emanate from a divorced space is the person who mistrusts the opposite sex. Right? Now that you're never going to see it in a lifetime. Potentially even in their marriage you might not see it, except when it comes out in that one context where the person finds their partner talking to somebody else. And
it triggers that.
It triggers it. And when you try to backtrace it, we find it to that divorced space, and so forth. So, but the idea that children show characteristics or different characteristics in different conditions can't be 100% put in a box, but it's clear-cut to try and understand each situation and saying what actions are coming out of there, what behaviors and emotions, and is it working or not for this context. Right?
Jazakallah, Gerald. It's time for us to go to a break. Stay tuned. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. A warm welcome back to Muslima Insight. Only before the break, we were touching on the different archetypes and what happens to a child when there's conflict in the home, or various other scenarios that can play out. And we started with one of the archetypes that can develop is the spoiled child. What is your views on that?
What actually first got me is that how does that develop?
Exactly.
How does a spoiled child develop? Because who's developing that? Who's spoiling the child? Because a baby's not born and it's a spoiled baby.
Exactly.
So, it just hit me quite hard. And I think what we have to look at is parenting. And what do we want from our children? And what do we want to teach our children? And I think then one has to go back to effective communication and setting boundaries. I can't wake up when my child's 13 and demanding the most expensive bike on the block and go and buy it maybe even bond my house if I have to, so that I'm giving that child what he wants. But what happened from 0 to 13? Because it's patterns that have developed. And then what are you dealing with at the end? What is the end result? And that's scary for me, because then you're dealing with a child who is going to have expectations.
Yes.
Yeah. And what adult do they become?
Yes. And I think, within an urban context, if one speaks within a highly westernized material context, what is often disturbing is to see the amount of acquisitions, material acquisitions that kids are getting. And we're obviously looking here at the context where a child gets what they want and not necessarily what they need, but how that distorts character later in life. Now, you might find that this child, and now becoming a teenager and a young adult, constantly seeks to fill that empty spirituality, that they need to fill it with acquisitions. But we also say, this was trained behavior, that when this child was seeking comfort and solace, a hug and a kiss, and when this child says, Mommy, let's go, or Daddy, let's go to the mall, is that really what the child means and wants? Would the child respond differently if you gave a hug and a kiss? Would the child be upset that you didn't go to the mall? And when they're in the mall and say, I want that, what are they really testing in you? Are they testing your love for them, or are they testing or they just need to fill a gap? So often children test parents, in their emotions, especially the absent parent, gets tested very much in terms of materialism. And children demand, and the parents fulfill. Later in life, it is so hard to close up that hole. When that child becomes the adult who is constantly in fights with the spouse because they're not meeting material need. They judge others on how much they give them. They judge an invitation to a party would be what type of presents were there, what type of this was given to me, and so forth. So yes, from an early age, as Dolly indicated, it's this idea of setting boundaries and making sure that you're building a child for the future. You're future-proofing your child. Right?
Yeah, because like you've rightfully alluded to, it is at the end of the day, what character person is going to be that adult at the end of the day, because character is key in today's. It's really key to survive from character ethic and not from personality ethic of materialistic things, because that can't truly help you to survive at the end of the day. It's character. Coming to another archetype is the neglected child. In today's times, there's a lot of pressures on parents to go and work, to survive, to be able to buy milk and bread. So what often happens is both parents go and work. What happens to that child psychologically, the one that is left at home with a nanny, left alone to grow up? There's no nurturing, no real love or true affection from the parents coming.
It's a difficult one, because I think reality dictates that both parents work in most households. But I think there's a way around it, and I think quite a few studies have also shown that parents at work can be effective parents. It doesn't mean you can't be an effective parent. It's about spending that time, and I think that's the thing. Spending that quality time with your child, giving that child affection. We've become so used to spending time with children, taking them to malls. Everyone's walking aimlessly in the shop, buying material things, and that's how we spend time with our children. But there are parents who work, who come home, make time for their children. There's parents who make sure they drop their children off to school in the morning so that they have that time in the car. So there's a lot of places you can pick up practical things. Take your weekends and spend time with your children. Get to know what's going on in your child's head, in your child's heart. Loving them, making them feel important.
Inquire about their day.
Giving them attention.
Yes.
Because that material thing that we spoke about, again, sometimes it's just a replacement. Because what I've seen around a lot recently, and I'm not throwing blame, but because I've seen parents go out with children and little ones, especially preschoolers, and they'd be sitting in a restaurant, and everyone's sitting, and then the toddler, the preschooler, sitting with an iPad. And it's almost, it's okay, let my child be occupied so he doesn't disturb what we're saying. But I think we need to start moving away from that. We need to say, what do we want?
It's almost like the child is already disconnected with the iPad.
Or
The parents are
little cell phone.
But
yeah.
the
already cut
child
off.
himself wants that because what's happened, this is what he's accustomed to.
Yeah. I think to add to Dolly's point here, when we talk about emotional neglect, right, we're really referring here to a situation where there's a disconnect between the child's emotional needs of love, affection, need for affirmation, well done, smart child, great. Constructive criticism is another need. A child needs to be criticized in a healthy way. I always say use the sandwich technique, which is start out with the praise, amazing boy, well done, or good girl, and then move to the criticism, and you say, and when you hit other children or you don't share your food with other children, it makes me feel very sad. Tell them how it makes you feel, and then end it with the healthy part again by saying, I think you're a smart child, and I really admire you. So that's we call it healthy feedback. But every child needs feedback, and they need you not to fool them. They need you to not overpraise them or underpraise them. You got to find that balance. Research has shown also where there's a culture of overpraise, even if your children mess up, parents still make it a hoo-ha and a hee-ha story, and they found that a child's expectations of them and their image of themselves is totally distorted. They, for example, have what we call delusions of grandeur.
Yeah,
They think they're great people, and everybody around say, but excuse me, that was just a mediocre action. You just threw the ball. We don't have to all jump up high because you threw the ball. You know, so often what we find that when schools then don't overpraise or they don't make a hoo-ha, the parents become upset because that's their method of reinforcement. The child becomes upset. You know, it's like, I got a 10th highest in class. That is a disaster. You know, and you say, but you passed. You know, and they say, but it's not good enough. And people are constantly setting the bar because it's a culture of overpraising for mediocrity. So we say be prepared for that. Now, the idea that when you meet your child's emotions, you are, or you're giving them a healthy dose of reality, good respect, in a non-aggressive, non-violent way, and where you go off the rails and you go off your rocker, is to learn that one thing that I say is the most amazing tool that a parent can learn. And it calls for the world's biggest humility, and that is the apology. To be able to say I'm sorry to a 2-year-old child or an 18-year-old is the most amazing thing. To your partner, to say I'm sorry. You may not be sorry for the point you're making, but you can apologize for the outcome and say, I'm sorry that we end up fighting. I'm sorry that we ended up raising our voices. I'm sorry that you felt bad. Could you do it for me though? I need you to sweep the yard.
And it's so important because again it shows good character.
Yes.
It shows taking, perhaps not like you say, it's sometimes a situation that you apologize for, but it's taking responsibility and teaching your child that it's okay to take responsibility, to lower yourself and to apologize. And would you say, coming back to the point of a child that is left alone, unattended, would you say some of those children are left feeling unworthy, not worthwhile? Can it lead to further depression in later years?
Yeah, absolutely. If we're talking now about children that are neglected, because that's...
It can, it does happen.
Not children just left at home because parents are working. So there's a bit of a difference there.
There's a difference,
yeah, I mean, those children, as far as, research shows those children don't even succeed very well academically.
Yes.
Because you need emotional resources to do well academically, you know. So you need to feel loved and warmth, to have self-worth and self-esteem to achieve in life, and that's what they don't have.
Absolutely. Gerald, closing statement from you on this note?
Well, as you can see, this is a big topic, and we just touched the surface, and we're like butterflies in a garden. We're jumping on a little bit of this and a little bit of that. And, you know, I'd just like to implore your viewers that to understand that at no point is this a bad indictment or judgment on parenting techniques. It's more a case of saying, can you reflect a little bit on what can still be learned and open yourself up to that humility, and your child can only benefit.
Absolutely, absolutely. I thank you both for again being here today. Inshallah, we will definitely do a follow-up program. We have, like Gerald has said, we've touched only the surface, and there's still a lot to uncover. May we all take from today's program much wisdom, much insight, and let us bring our children up with good character by seeking out their emotional needs and raising them with the love and the care that we have within us. From myself, Adila, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.